Do you ever feel stuck in both teaching and life, or worse, that everything is just like snowballing in the wrong direction? Today on the podcast, I interviewed Jon Osborn, who's an expert sports psychologist, and we are talking all about creating momentum, both in teaching and everywhere else in your life this coming school year. And we basically went off script, which always makes for my favorite episodes, and we got really real with you. So you're going to want to keep listening to see all the golden nuggets that came up during this episode. Welcome to Educate and Rejuvenate the podcast, episode 145, The Power of Momentum for Teachers. Welcome to Educate and Rejuvenate, the podcast to help you revitalize your teaching, renew your spirit, and reignite your passion for life. I'm your host, Kelsey Sorensen, a former teacher, current homeschool mom, published author, and certified life coach. Whether you are a teacher in a traditional classroom, homeschool from your kitchen table, or anywhere in between, I am on a mission to help you not only survive as an educator, but thrive. Get ready to uplevel your skills with incredible insights from guest experts and discover the missing piece, rejuvenating yourself. Are you ready to both educate and rejuvenate? Let's go. Happy back to school season for those of you who are listening right as this episode is live. Maybe you're going back this week. Maybe you went back last week. Maybe you're going back after Labor Day. No matter what, I know this time tends to be a little bit busy and we can definitely gain some momentum at the beginning of the year, but sometimes that momentum can be stress or it can be overwhelmed that just compounds, right? And so today we're talking all about momentum and how you can leverage it in your favor. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast at all, you know, we've also had a lot going on lately too. So you've had a lot going on with getting back to school. We've had a lot going on in the company. We did a full rebrand earlier this year from Wife, Teacher, Mommy to Educate and Rejuvenate. We had our event. We created a new lifetime option for our members, which has been a lot of fun. We are almost ready to launch our mobile app. My book is coming out next month. Lots of momentum we've been building this year, building something completely new and different from what it first used to be. And it's also been a lot of momentum behind the scenes for me that you all haven't necessarily seen, but maybe you felt if you've been following along this podcast for a bit that I've been doing a lot of my own personal growth and development as well. I've been doing lots of coaching myself. I wrote my book, which was a big thing for me. Lots of research and soul searching for that. Therapy, started doing yoga and strength training, deepening some friendships, reading the books that are really just calling to me. A lot of personal growth. And we recently had a house flood. When we came home from the Teach Your Heart Out cruise, our whole basement was flooded. And I can't remember right now if I shared that on here yet. I will tie it into a solo episode next month where I really talk about how that has been a thing. But we're getting ready for our homeschool year, right? Picking new curriculum, figuring things out, while also all the business momentum, everything else. And so we've been building this momentum, and even though it's still in the messy stages, like literally messy in my house right now as we clean up from the flood, all the odds and ends, wrapping up from the event, and troubleshooting some things with the app and planning my book, everything is moving forward. And it's all about what we talk about. It's about what we do with what comes up, right? As we talk about a lot on the podcast, it's not about what circumstances come our way, but it's about what we think and how we feel and what we do, right? And we're talking a lot about that today here on the podcast. And that's why I loved this topic of momentum that our amazing guest, Jon Osborn, suggested that we talk about today. Now, Jon has been on the podcast before. It was almost exactly 2 years ago. It was September 6th, I believe, that episode 30 with Jon Osborn aired here on what was Wife, Teacher, Mommy, the podcast at the time. And we talked about building mental toughness for teachers and students. And it was a great episode. I remember so many great things that we talked about there, and I actually want to listen to it again here soon. And Jon has also done a couple calls in the club that the replays will be available for those of you who are members, if you want to check it out, if you like what he has to share today. And that episode, what we did before was really great, but we both felt, as I was talking to Jon after, which is always a privilege I get to have with our amazing guests. We kind of get to debrief after and just kind of chat for just a few minutes before we head off about to do whatever else both of us have to do in our day. But we both felt like this episode was even better, even stronger than that first one we did. And he was like, I might have been nervous the first time. And I was like, I was still figuring out podcasting and all of that. And we both had our own growth and momentum that we've been creating these past 2 years, which you're going to get to hear a lot about that from Jon here on this episode too. And I'm still honestly feeling the momentum of this interview. It was such a great interview. And Jon just always has so many incredible things to say. So you're really privileged to get to hear from him today. And like I mentioned in the little teaser at the beginning, we went super off script. Like last night and actually we really put this together kind of like in the last 24 hours. Like I texted Jon and I was like, oh, I'll get some questions together. He's like, oh, I'll do it for you. So he put together some awesome questions. So I was like, okay, I'm going to add these ones. And then we completely ignored the questions. We actually touched on everything, but we went about it in such a more organic way, which really leads to my favorite interviews that we have, because that's when there's so much more creativity, so much more, momentum, you could even say, in the interview, because we're just feeding off of each other and sharing what is really inspired and what just naturally comes up. So this is, again, one of those interviews that really did that. So you're really going to enjoy this episode today. Okay, before we dive into the episode though, let me tell you a little bit about Jon. I've got his bio on his awesome Utah Sport Psych website pulled up. Now, again, even if you don't live in Utah, that's just a name, because he can easily obviously go in person in Utah, but he is willing to help anybody wherever. So, okay, here is what his bio has to say. So Jon's journey into sports psychology began at the age of 13 when he dislocated his knee for the first time. Over the next 3 years, he experienced the same injury 7 more times, each requiring rehabilitation and keeping him on the sidelines watching his teammates compete. These challenges ignited his interest in the fundamental principles of sports psychology. After enduring 4 surgeries, Jon pursued his passion academically, earning a master's degree in sport and performance psychology from the University of Utah, my alma mater as well. As a professional, Jon focuses on enhancing mental toughness through the application of mental skills. He delivers memorable lessons and techniques using creative methods such as negativity cocktails and PB&J sandwiches to help individuals develop resilience, control, and confidence. From sales teams to educators and golfers to drill teams, Jon enjoys working with athletes of all ages and abilities. He is the head of the mental performance coach for the University of Alaska at Anchorage, as well as working with Utah State University, Southern Virginia University, Westminster College, Show Up Utah, Utah Association of Elementary School Principals, Utah Charter Network, Siddons Martin Emergency Group, and various high school athletic programs across the state of Utah. And Jon enjoys spending his free time outdoors, camping, hiking, playing sports with his wife, Megan, who's also on the Educate and Rejuvenate team, and their 3 children, Charlotte, Gigi, and Walter. So without further ado, I'm so excited for you to hear this amazing conversation with Jon. He's amazing. So if you love what you hear on the podcast here today, make sure that you follow him. We'll have all the links in the show notes. Now let's dive in. All right, Jon, I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast again. It's been a little bit. We're really glad to have you back.
No, I'm really glad to be here. Like a lot's changed since I was last on, but your podcast has remained the same. So this is awesome.
Well, we're so excited to have you. And I would love to hear what's changed for you since we last had you on. And we're talking about momentum today. So how is that currently playing in with what's going on and what's changed from between now and I think 2022 when we had you on before?
Yeah, I think it has been a couple of years. Right now, I'm in the middle of a big time momentum shift. About a couple months ago, I started my own sports psychology and mental performance coaching practice. And so I'm learning, getting the fire hose of all these lessons like a business owner and all the hard things. Essentially, I feel like I'm trying to create momentum while writing momentum at the same time. So it's I think we kind of we just watched the Olympics. I think with those surfers, right? They're riding their wave and they're just hoping the wave continues. And they actually play a big part in keeping that wave going by not breaking the waves of momentum. Anyway, so that's what I've been up to, and it's been awesome and way fun, challenging as heck. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
I love it, and I love hearing just that was kind of a risk that you took to be okay, I'm going to kind of trust myself and do my own thing. That's something we've been talking about a lot, is having that trust and faith in ourselves and our abilities, whether you're teaching in a classroom or homeschooling or you're an educational leader or, whoever might be listening to this podcast. And
it did take a lot of guts, but I think one of my, I don't know, philosophies, I guess you can call it, is you can't trust yourself unless you test the trust. right? Like
That's
I
true.
can't, I trust myself and never take any chances, which means like, trusting yourself also like actually means you're willing to fail,
Yeah.
right? Because you can't guarantee success 100. Like, no one bats 1,000, right? And so if I truly trust myself, it means to take chances, knowing that failure might. But what I'm trusting is my ability to execute, right? The vision. But I
Yeah.
also trust myself to like bounce back it when and if failure does happen. So there's a ton of trust involved in taking risks. And it is, if we're like trusting yourself, right? And so I think like taking the risk is actually how you prove to yourself that you do trust yourself, right? That's a great affirmation to say in the morning. I trust
Yeah.
myself, you're a strong and capable man or whatever.
Yes.
But it really like how you show that trust is by going out and taking risks in whatever your life is.
Oh, I love that because somebody could say, "Oh yeah, I trust myself to always stay in my comfort zone and always keep myself safe because I've never like
Right.
doing the thing, right? Or putting myself to where I could potentially fail or feel that negative emotion." And so I love the way you put that part of trusting ourselves is like kind of putting ourselves out of our comfort zone, putting ourselves to where somewhere new, kind of uncharted territory, and then
Yeah.
gain momentum from there.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the most like impressive characteristics to me. And as I live my life and as I coach and start this business, one of the characteristics I look for in other people that I truly really value, and the reason why I look for it in others is so that I can create it in myself, is those people who do fail. I love watching people. Like I love watching a basketball player miss a shot, a golfer, hook one into the water. Like I
Yeah.
love watching people fail, which is a funny thing to say. I love it because great people respond to that, right? Because great people respond a certain way. I'm not saying it doesn't phase them. Like no one likes failure, but they know that failure has now happened in the past, and all there is learn. It's like, okay, if I got this exact same opportunity again, what would I do different, right? And would I do anything differently, or would I just respond to this? So I love failure, and I
Yeah.
love watching other people fail and seeing how they handle it. And honestly, that's probably one of like the like almost immediate recognitions for me of like I can tell how successful someone's going to be.
Yes, I love that too because, like, it's never interesting to hear somebody get up and be like, "Yeah, everything just went perfectly, and it
Yes.
was just
Right,
like
right.
this thing, like nothing went wrong." It's kind of like in stories, we want that conflict. We want to see like how did you
Right.
overcome? Even going to conferences, like I was at Teach Your Heart Out recently, and they talked about the adversity they've seen in the classroom, and also business leaders I've seen like we almost went broke. We almost went bankrupt. And then I just kept trusting myself and taking risks and
Yes.
putting myself out there, even though I'd kept getting no, 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 no. And, that's when it's through that struggle and what we learn from it about ourselves where we get that momentum, that getting back up whenever we fall
Right.
down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your process, rather the things that you do are far more important and far more indicative of success, like what you do rather than like what happens to you. Right. So I think when you get caught up in results,
Mhm.
kind of getting into our topic of momentum, like for me, that's what momentum really is the ability to keep doing things regardless of the result. And so I've kind of come up with this like fun little like equation that's really, really popular is made, lots of people I'm sure have heard about it. E plus R equals O. Viktor Frankl's book, about his time in Auschwitz
Such a
and
good book.
whatnot. So great. And that's very, very familiar. And I've taken that and worked out with a couple people creating this kind of vision of momentum using that simple principle of, events happen to me, stimulus happens to me, but my response determines the outcome. And our response
Hmm.
also determines the direction of our momentum. And that's so eye-opening to me to be like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, momentum isn't some like metaphysical out of my control like
Hmm.
force, right? There was a really cool ESPN.com like investigative article about like momentum in sports, because sometimes we think momentum is unique to sports, which isn't true at all. We talk about it a ton in sports, right?
Yeah.
Someone talks about getting the momentum going into the locker room or coming out of halftime, or this really big play shifted the momentum. And momentum isn't like a metaphysical. It can't be measured. It's something we know, right?
Hmm.
And it's not like a physical, tangible, like there's not an energy in the air that's like, oh, we can now track this, molecule or whatever. But it is like a feeling inside ourselves, being forced, being moved, not forced, moved in a different direction, right? Or in a particular direction. And so think about that. about how powerful like that force is on our side, and how that is something we can control. We control that by how we respond to the things that happen to us, and then how we respond to our response as well. And that's how we kind of create momentum.
I love that so much. And I love that this is kind of just a different way of thinking about a lot of what we've talked about here on the podcast, and just hearing different ways of thinking about it, like the stimulus and the response, like you were talking about. Like, it's not what happens to us. Like, a lot of times that is completely out of our control, but it is what we do about it. And it might take us some time to regroup and to process our feelings or to do whatever we need to do. But again, it's that response that, how long it takes us to get back up again. Yeah.
Well,
I love that explanation.
Even responding to my feelings, like that is a great response to something that happens. A coworker says something hurtful to me, right? That's my event. And I get to like me figuring out how I feel about it first before I respond. That in itself is a response, right? So like in that scene, me figuring out how I feel about what they said, that's the beginning stages of momentum, right?
Yes.
And that's a really important step in such an emotionally charged situation that so many people, we think of, coworker says something mean to me or tough to hear, and I respond
immediately. Yeah.
Like, hey, figure how you feel about it, right?
Yeah.
When I started taking those steps, and not just with coworkers, but, with coaches, players, parents, whoever, I started realizing that there's actually kind of a list of criteria for me, whether or not I actually care what you think, right? And so like I was responding to these people that like, actually, like I wouldn't come to you for advice. So why am I taking your criticism, right? That's become like a really powerful kind of mantra for me, is like, if I would come to this person for advice, that I don't actually care anything about their criticism, right? And so that was me figuring out how I felt about that first. And then once I figured that out, then I could respond appropriately, right? And I love that like decision-making point, right? Of deciding how I feel. And so it can take our momentum or start our momentum on a path that's either positive momentum or negative momentum, right? And so it's such a powerful, like our responses to stuff have such a powerful effect on our futures. And so what I've been really trying to focus on with the people I'm coaching and helping is for them to like not give up on the moment, right? Like, don't be so quick to act that you forget how to respond.
Yes.
And that response, like I said, it's really going to change the trajectory of the next few moments, right? That I take a tough criticism from somebody and I determine like, hey, I don't really care what they think. So I respond with a smile instead of like a word of anger, right? And now all of a sudden my trajectory is like completely different, right? And because of that smile or that word of anger, I can now like create momentum on top of those types of things, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. And what I love that you touched on too is that with momentum, it's not about, I feel like sometimes when people think of momentum, they think like go, go, go. Like our society is just like constant, like, there's no time to take a moment to check in how you feel. I just have to respond right now. But sometimes momentum is about being more self-aware and being more like conscious of our response, which sometimes means we take that pause, we take that moment to check in with ourselves and be like, okay, what momentum do I want to create? Do I want to create that, I can't remember what words you use, but like the negative momentum, or do I want to create the momentum, the direction I more consciously want to go?
Yeah. Denzel Washington has this really, really great quote that I love, and says in the Denzel Washington way, right? Don't confuse movement with progress.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think about that a lot with what you're saying of like just this busy world of like, I got to go, 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 go. That I think a lot of times like things happen to us and we're moving, right? But we're not actually progressing at all, right? And when I think of like I'm not progressing my momentum, I'm just like doing stuff. And so if I'm conscious, like to your point, if I'm conscious about the way, like the direction I want to go, that I can intentionally build momentum going that direction. And it may not be these like snap judgments. It may be like much more like deliberate and methodical, and like choosing how I want to respond in a way that will create positive momentum for me going forward. Essentially what I'm trying to do is help people make good decisions now that will help them make better decisions later. I had this really cool, I did this really cool example with a girls lacrosse team earlier this year, talking about momentum, and I gave them all whiteboards, just like, players actually got one like right. just these little like small whiteboard size things. And I had them write down like what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? So we had one girl write down the worst thing that's ever happened to her on the lacrosse field. And I said, okay, I was like, yeah, you and you, I want you to respond like right on your whiteboard. I want you to write down like a great response to that event. What's something that'd be so cool for her to respond this way? I want you to write down a terrible response to that event. And I had them put like, up above and below. And then we kind of followed that chain. What we did, 60 girls. And what we showed is that we took the one event, and if we continued to build positively with positive responses, how far we got. And we saw like as that chain went up and up and up with more and more good responses, we saw easier decisions being made. We saw, better success in their endeavors. We saw more likable people, like all these different things that were all good responses to this one kind of, terrible event. Right. And then we saw the exact opposite as we moved down. Like, what's the worst way to respond to that? What's the worst way to respond to that? And we built that. And I showed them, we visually saw this huge gap, like between the last whiteboard on the top side and the last whiteboard on the bottom side, there was probably 30, 40 feet of difference on the football field. And so we went over to the bleachers and we went up. I was like, look at this. Like, this is what we're talking about, like why your response matters, because it's creating momentum for you. Look how far apart these two ideas are, right? You being far better off and you being in like the wallows of like depression and loneliness, right? They themselves are far apart because early on in the process, we responded to this one event different. And so the challenge to them was like, don't underestimate the power of a moment, and don't underestimate the power of like a great response, that you need to take a pause so you respond well, that it's worth it. It's worth the pause because what that momentum is going to be able to do for you.
Yes, it is worth that pause. And that visual and just that concept of that lesson you did. And I want to add, because we have educators listening, that you could do that same lesson with your students about, like, it doesn't have to be about sports. It can be about, choices they make in their life or anything, and the different directions they end up. Like, I feel like that is such a powerful way to, like, I want to do that with my kids now. I love that lesson.
No, it is so good, and it can be done everywhere, right? And I think it should be, because what it does, like what it did when I was doing with that group, is that if I'm the 10th person to go, right, like I'm well removed from the initial event, so we still got a lot of people to go, but I had to visualize what a good response would look like. I had to answer the question, right? Like, what does a good response look like to this event? So I had to kind of like see it a little bit, right? I had to put myself in those shoes, right? And so they were able to see the good response to something or the bad response to something, right? And so I think it can be incredibly powerful, because what it does is it allows children or people to express like a little bit of creativity of thought.
Yeah.
But to see the impact that their creativity of thought can have on their direction, right? That it's like, I can get creative with my response, and if it's negative, it's going to lead me on this like kind of path down, right? Or if I can be creative with my thought and do something good to respond to this, it can lead me, up this direction, right? So like our mind is so powerful, and we have such like an incredible power to be creative and to think of positive solutions to our problems. And so I love the activity because it produces a great visual. And you're right, teachers can do this so easily in the classroom. And it would be awesome to see their kids up on the whiteboard being like, hey, Johnny breaks your scissors, right? Or cuts your paper in half. Like, you got two choices, good one and a bad one. Tell me, what does a good one look like, right? And let them express that. Be awesome for teachers.
Yeah. And the other great thing is, you might, even if it's starting to go down, you could realize, at one point, you might notice, you might kind of have that self-awareness, like, I'm kind of headed down a direction I don't want to go. And that doesn't mean you have to keep going that way, because every moment is a new moment. Then you can choose, actually, I am going to shift that now. Like, we can learn from our past and we can redirect.
It puts a lot of power in the moment, right? That if things are happening to me, and maybe I feel like I'm on that like downward spiral or trajectory, that just that simple recognition, like, is a moment for me to change. Right? That like, at no moment am I forced to continue down this path, right? My trajectory can be changed at any moment. And all it takes is me responding well to this right here, right? I think it's incredibly powerful that we're not like, we don't just make changes, before something or at the very end of something when we evaluate, right in the moment, right? You could be teaching, having a lecture or teaching your class, and the day started off great, but then a series of events and interruptions like really start going down. I know it's lunchtime, but let's not throw the day away. Or we're plugged into a movie, or we're going to give up on the day. No, you have the ability to change the trajectory of that day, which then may change the trajectory of that year simply with like one good decision. And if we can take one good decision and turn it into two good decisions, three good decisions, now created momentum that may have started this way, but now is moving it.
Yes, that I love this. This is just so powerful because it shows how we can, and we can shift that anytime. If you're listening to this and you're like, I am headed down like this other way. And that's what Jon was just saying. You could be like, okay, I'm not going to throw it all away just because honestly, if you're listening when this comes out, you're at the beginning of a new school year. Again, and it's always a new moment. It could be like Christmas break, or it could be the very end, last week of school, and you could still do this. But it's a great time to, utilize that moment to start off the school year.
Timelines were created by man, right? Like we put things as teachers, we put things in terms of quarters and semesters and, weeks, days, right? But really like we're building, for not just those time periods, right?
Yeah.
So, last week of school, like we can actually start building momentum, that will then manifest itself for the next school year or throughout our summer, right? Summer's not just a time to recover, but summer's a time to like really build momentum.
And I've seen that because we just had a bunch of new people join us in our Educate and Rejuvenate Club. And I've met with a few of them one-on-one. And it was amazing because like I'm seeing them already gaining this momentum from doing a lot of what you're talking about. And it's just so powerful to realize that this summer, it's not just like I'm going to sit back and lay by the pool, but it can really be starting to gain momentum for that coming school year. And you can start that now, right? I mean, listening to this, you're gaining momentum. Like if you're still here 20 minutes into this podcast, you are gaining momentum.
That's the hope. That's the idea, right? And that's what's cool is that it's all about our perception, right? Laying by the pool could be me creating momentum.
It could be,
because that is a positive response to like what I have going on, recharging my batteries, reconnecting with maybe some important people in my life, right? So that's where our perception really matters, because laying by the pool could also be creating negative momentum.
It could be either. Yeah.
If that's me, if I'm disassociating what I'm trying to do, if I should just like being lazy, right? If I shouldn't be by the pool, whatever it is, but my perception really matters and how like momentum is being created, right? And that's what I think is like so powerful for us to understand, is that like our perception, like it's not what we're doing, it's how we perceive what we're doing, right? If I believe that this is benefiting me and leading me, I guess, helping me progress as a teacher, as a parent, as a leader, whatever. If I perceive it's helping me, then it will. And if I perceive that I'm being lazy, guess what? You're also right. Only because, like, are you actually being lazy? I don't know, but if you perceive it, then it's true.
So let's talk a little bit about how like we've done this, because we've been talking about it conceptually, like what is momentum, and the exercise or the lesson you taught, the activity. Amazing. And I feel like I'm going to add that to my homeschool to-do list because I'm homeschooling our kids this year. Yeah. I love it so much. I thought
about that for you. Like you run a very successful business and you're still trying to make it more so, right?
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, as I've been like teaching this idea, to teachers and athletes and whatnot. How have you seen it, Kelsey? How have you like lived this momentum as you kind of reflect on maybe your early years or maybe some like kind of critical junction points? How do you feel like the momentum that you guys have at Educate and Rejuvenate has boiled down to like small moments where you responded well?
Oh my gosh, it's such a good question. And I feel like I have examples of both. I have examples of where I responded well. I have examples of where I responded terribly and what I learned from it. So it's been quite the journey for sure. Like we started, 10 years ago with just TPT, and that was our big thing, teachers pay teachers. And then when COVID hit, that was a big pivotal moment because at that time we were making basically all of our money off of our ready to go sub plans, which is now hardly even what we talk about anymore. It's crazy. But at that time, that was our big thing. And all of a sudden school is closed. Nobody needed a substitute, right?
True.
Everybody's home. And so I had a week where I was just like in panic and shock. And I think a lot of us were, because we were in a global pandemic. But, but
And we didn't know what the future was going to be. Right?
yeah, I was like, well, maybe in a week it'll be fine. They'll be back. And then lots of people will be sick and they'll need their sub plans again. I mean, obviously that's not a good thing, but it was like, well, maybe it'll be okay. But then after that week, I kind of had to get myself up and be like, okay, well, this is the current moment. The current moment is now. Everybody's home learning. So we then pivoted and we made products where it was like digital. We converted some stuff to digital. Your wife, Megan, actually helped with a lot of that because your wife, Megan's on my team. And then so some of our team members working on that. And then some of our team members working on home learning packets that could be used either by parents or teachers. And then we're like, what other platforms can we go to? So there's Jane.com before all the craziness happened with Jane.com. I don't know if you heard about that, but we're like, let's put them up on there because parents might want it. And let's start an Etsy shop. So we started doing new things and that helped us gain momentum. And then actually we dropped at first and then we gained new momentum because we're like, what is it we're doing in this moment? And it doesn't have to be what we did before. It can be different. It can be new. And so I feel like that was a really pivotal moment being like, okay, let's adapt with what the current needs are. And just trust that, okay, we don't know if anybody's going to buy these things, but we're going to do it anyway. And it did work out. Like those helped. And then we had some great times. And then we're like, oh, it's going to stay here. It's going to stay here. And then what happened? The teachers pay teachers. Algorithm changed. And suddenly we weren't ranking in search anymore. And then, so it's been so many waves of up and down. And then there have been times where I responded out of fear or scarcity. Like we need to cut this. We need to do that. And that never felt good. Like it felt bad. So then, I would notice that and be like, okay, no, we need to trust that this is going to work out. Like we have, what else is it that teachers need? And that's when, like, when we did a survey, what are your biggest struggles right now? It was not with printables. It was not like I need a new resource to help out. It was, I am stressed out. I am burned out. I don't need another PDF. I need help. And that's when we started our events.
To do, right?
Yeah. That's when we started our events and eventually coaching and all of that. And so I think because of all these struggles, but because of still being in touch with, what I wanted to help people with and trusting that over time, like it's not going to look exactly like I planned. Like it looks a lot different and yet it's actually better.
I love that. I feel like you taught me a really important principle of that momentum. I mean, by its definition, momentum doesn't stay put.
No.
Right? We really are momentum is happening. And we just kind of get to determine whether that is like a positive momentum or like a negative momentum, right? And if we ever feel stuck, that's almost like a really great indicator to us that we are riding that like negative momentum, right?
Yeah.
I think as we think about help for teachers, what can the teacher do to create momentum in their classroom or how can they notice it, right? Is pay attention. If you ever feel stuck, that's going to be a real good indicator to you that you're not creating positive momentum, that you're actually on that negatives. And so what can you do is you just start to create, even if it's imperfect, or start preparing a lesson plan.
Yeah.
You don't even have to use that lesson plan. But what that does is you start creating, it provides you with direction and you feel like you are doing something productive, right? And so that changes the direction. I love your story, right? The number of times that you thought you quote found the answer and you did. You did find the answer, right? But that answer was only the answer for a short period of time. And then the world changed, the world shifted, and so did you.
Yeah.
Momentum doesn't stay put. So we can't either. And I think you're just a really great example of that, of not staying put and not being we do subplanes. Everyone's doing anything other than that. That's our niche. All we're going to do, right? You've molded into what always answering the question, what are teachers? I think that's awesome, right? And that's really kind of how we create momentum is we change, move based on the newness of the situation, or what the situation requires.
Yes. I love that. And that was a great moment for me to even think about that and be like, oh, wow, the ups and downs of everything, but how much I've been able to learn from it. What about you?
For me, momentum is created in a positive direction using one question. So what are you going to do about it? That came to me once as I was doing a coaching session with a high school soccer athlete, and they had a whole list of things that honestly, they were terrible. It sucked. I'm really, really sorry, right? And then it kind of came to me in our session, and I was like, we just kind of sitting there like in the silence after all this like sucky stuff. And I said to him, I was like, so what are you going to do about it? And he was like, well, I'm just going to get out there and play. And I'm like, that's the thing you could do. And so I realized that question is so powerful. And it's not like one of my questions. I asked it to myself. I asked it to my clients, people I work with. Okay, like, so what are you going to do about it? Because that answer is momentum. Right. And so I asked myself that, I imagine if I was a golfer and I just hit a ball out of bounds, what are you going to do? I do my absolute best to hit that ball. Right. And then it's like you show up one day to school and your principal is like, oh, by the way, we had to change around class. You have an entirely new class. Sucks. But what are you going to do about it? Right. Are you going to stand up in front of those kids and be like, this is why my situation is terrible? You're going to get in there and you're going to try and teach them. You're going to try and teach them like to the best of your ability that day. Right. And that lesson might go terribly, but you tried because you did so what are you going to do about it? I'm going to try my absolute best. And that's how we create momentum. So for me, that's something I try to do every day as I'm building this business. And like right now, like my goal is just build. And that's honestly a super fun place to be in because there's no bad idea. All I'm doing, all I get to do is just do and do and do. And if it takes me to a podcast or it takes me to a team session with a sports team or a one-on-one session with a professional, like I just get to do. And I don't got to worry about what's the effect of it, right?
Yeah.
Without doing something like that, it's going to be positive momentum. And so that's why, like for teachers, as you're heading back to school, the brand new school year, whether you're a first-year teacher, whether you're a veteran teacher, I know it sounds weird, but just do, right? Just create. Do things. Like don't worry about what's this going to lead to, or is this for me? Right? Just simply create and do things, and you'll create like that positive momentum, and you won't necessarily know it until you look back on it. Just like Kelsey and I did here, as we like look back, we realize, oh my gosh, like I'm riding this awesome momentum wave, and I wasn't focused on momentum. What I was focused on was just like doing what's best. You're right. It's honestly, it's like that song from Frozen 2, do the next best thing or the next right thing or whatever Arla sings, right? Yeah. It's really how we create momentum. Like we might be in a cave, we might be with like a really terrible class or not with the students we want or the coworkers we want. But like all we can do is do the next best thing for us, right? And that's how we create that momentum. So that's how I saw it in my practice going through grad school and joining up with the practice, starting my own is I'm just going to try and do like the next best thing. And whether it works or not, I don't know, but I'm just going to try and do the next best thing along the way.
And I love that. And I was so excited when Megan was like, oh, Jon would love to come on the podcast. Like you're trying like all these new things and like you were just explaining like all the different things. I love that question also so much. Like, what are you going to do about it? Because it really is about kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. What is your response? Because that's the part where the momentum happens. It's not like what's going on in the world or the external circumstances. It's what are we going to do about it?
Absolutely. And it's such an admirable trait that I see from people who like when the subject of the economy, comes up, they don't have much to say or add to the conversation because they're too busy like living in the present moment. They're too busy living their lives. Like obviously the economy affects them, right?
Oh, for sure.
They're far more concerned with what are they going to do? Right? Like, what are they going to do with the economy or what are they going to do with the election? What are they going to do with the time they have, the choices they have in front of them? So for me, that's how you have like success. That's how you make progress.
Yes.
Back to this, not just movement, that's how you make progress is here are the decisions I have right in front of me. Like which one's going to lead the best, the best for me? Like which choice do I want to make? Which is going to help me have that best momentum. And that's all I try to do each and every day when I wake up, head pops off the pillow. Like, Kodo is going to hold, and it might be good, it might be bad, but we're going to see based on my actions, not on someone else. So I'm going to let someone else determine if today's a good day or a bad day. I'm going to determine that based on what
I love that so much. And I feel like we've just covered so much ground in the last, 34 minutes we've been chatting. Like, I mean, I feel like I got so much out of this conversation. Like, thank you, Jon, for being here today on the podcast. I appreciate the time you took. I know you have a lot going on with starting up a new company and all the things that come with it.
And who knows what comes from this? And maybe it's nothing, but I know I've gotten better from being able to just like teach and talk and share, hear from your experiences as well. This has been awesome. I would love, if I could, I would
Oh,
love,
yes.
Kelsey, if your listeners could help me out. Follow at Utah Sports Psych. Even if you're not in Utah, I get that, but like this is where I'm at Utah Sports Psych. Follow us on Instagram. Go follow us at utahsportspsych.com. We're always I'm just trying to churn out content for teachers, for athletes, for parents, the whole gambit. I think you'll be able to learn. We talk about topics like momentum, like responses, like our focus, managing stress, anxiety, whatever. And if there's anything I can do for any of your listeners or people with their groups, their athletes themselves individually and professionally, like I'd be happy to, and I would love to help them out. So please, please, please give us a listen, give us a follow, and we'll see if we can turn this into something special.
Yes, Jon is, every time I hear him speak, because I've heard him speak at a couple different events, and he just does such a great job and has an amazing stage presence and shares such valuable insights every time. So he'd be great to bring on for a PD or...
That's really kind. It will get rowdy. I can guarantee that. The reason I'm not wearing a shirt and tie right now is because I don't know if I was about to get up and jump around and dance around during this podcast even, but it'll be rowdy. But yeah, we'll definitely leave with something good for sure.
Yes. So then make sure, again, even just following him on Instagram, all his platforms, when you're starting something new, even if you're not like buying something, like likes, comments, shares can help get the message out. It all helps to get the message out. It's all momentum. Yes. So definitely, if you enjoyed this episode, which if you're still listening, I'm sure you did, I would love for you to take a moment to do that, because everything Jon shares that I've heard has been amazing. And I can't wait to see everything that you do with this momentum you're creating.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. I really appreciate you having me on today. It was awesome.
Thank you for joining me on Educate and Rejuvenate, the podcast today. If you love what you heard in this episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're hungry for even more, be sure to check out the book that I wrote. It's called Educate and Rejuvenate, a 3-step guide to revitalize your teaching, renew your spirit, and reignite your passion for life. It takes everything you learn here on the podcast and that I teach our members inside the Educate and Rejuvenate Club into a guidebook you can refer to again and again. One of our early readers said it was like clarity for her brain. Plus, it's not only a book. With your purchase, you'll get a full PDF guide with exercises and links to videos and more so that you can not only consume but apply everything that you learn. If you're ready to make Educate and Rejuvenate not just a podcast you passively listen to, but a lifestyle that you put into action, it's time to grab your copy on Amazon today. Or head to educateandrejuvenate.com/book to read the first chapter and the introduction today.